After having an incredible competition season, I'm going to take some time this year to brew for fun rather than trying to perfect a style for judging. And that's going to start with something that I think I overheard at a local brewery here. So that fun starts now. Welcome to Big Monster Brewing. I am Matt, and in this video, I'm going to be brewing something that's a little out of my wheelhouse. But before we get to that, if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing, hitting that notification bell so that you're alerted for all the videos of the, I'm not sure what I'll be doing this year, brews, including a lot of stuff that I'm going to be doing on the Anvil Foundry, even though this is not an Anvil Foundry brewing episode. So the beer I'm making today, I'm not quite sure what you'd call it in terms of style. What the end result I want to get, I think you would best describe it as a grape sour. This recipe is inspired by a grape sour that my wife and I had at a local brewery here in the Orlando area. And the recipe I'm basing it on is based after 5 words I overheard in the conversation that I guess I was technically eavesdropping on because they weren't talking to me, and I kind of feel bad admitting that, but those 5 words were, "It's all Welch's grape juice." I had to make sure that is 5 words. Now, at first I assumed the question was, what's in this? And that was the answer. So I bought enough grape juice just to put in a fermenter and pitch some yeast. And then I thought about that. First, it probably would have done something. That's a ton of fermentable sugars in that grape juice, but it's definitely not technically a beer at all. There's no malts, there's no grains. There's really only, when it comes to the 4 things that typically make a beer, just water and yeast. So it would have been a wine, I think, is what it really would have come down to if I'd done that. And I don't think that it's legal for Orlando and Florida in general, Florida breweries, to make wine and beer without 2 separate licenses. So I'm pretty sure, for a few reasons, it couldn't be just all grape juice, just from what would the end result would be, and from a legal technicality or whatever you want to call it, at least as far as I know it. I'm no lawyer, but I'm almost positive that's correct. You need 2 separate licenses for that. So I'm still taking that idea and thinking that maybe the question was, what is the grape flavoring, or where does the grape flavor come from? That might have been closer to what the question was that I didn't hear. That's what I'm going to run with in this recipe. So instead of making it an all grape juice fermentation, I'm going to do a 50-50. I'm making a very basic Berliner Weiss base and going to mix that in with a 1/2 gallon of grape juice and see what we have as a starting point for this sour experiment. So to make that base beer that we're going to mix in, I have to start with a grist, and it's a very simple grist this time. It's a 1 gallon batch, so it's 1 pound, 6.4 ounces of Pilsner malt and 4 ounces of white wheat malt. And that is it. A simple, classic base beer recipe that should produce a good amount of fermentable sugars and should be a good match for the grape juice addition. This is a for fun brew, so I broke out an old friend, my old mash tun, what I do a mash in a bag in. I have been doing 1 gallon batches on the Anvil Foundry because I can control the temperature and I can recirculate the whole time. This mash tun will get me within 1, 2, maybe at worst 3 degrees of my target temperature for mashing. And for an experiment like this, just brewing for fun, that's fine. All in all, this is a little easier and quicker to clean, and I kind of came up with this recipe on a whim on one of our holiday vacation days this year, so I didn't leave myself a whole lot of time to do it the way I would do it on the Foundry. So it's time to do a mash in the bag, or mash tun. I think of mash in the bag is what I called it. I think it's been over a year since I've done this, but I'm kind of excited to do it again. To start this brew, I heat up 2.3 gallons of water. While that heats up, I mill the grains, and I double mill with this process, so I have the second pass of the grains go directly into the bag I already have laid out in the mash tun. The water is at about 90 degrees, so that's a good time to add the salts and stir them in really well. I use the Brew in a Bag water calculator website to figure out what strike temperature I should start with, and it says I need the water to be 153 degrees in order to mash in at 149. So once that reaches 153 degrees, I add the water, stir it up, and I do take a temperature reading, and I'm a little over 151 degrees, which is a little off my target. But again, this is a fun experiment brew. That's perfectly fine. I have no worries on that temperature whatsoever. I'm going to rest the mash for 60 minutes, so I have plenty of time to get my hop additions ready. And the hops are even simpler than the grist. It is 0.14 ounces of select spalt hops at 10 minutes, and that is it. Like we talked about earlier, this is a very simple grist and kind of light in the amount of sugars that's coming out. And I did that for a reason. That's because I am going to be doing, like I said before, a 50-50 mix of that beer, or the wort, until it turns into beer, of course, and the grape juice directly in the fermenter. So to help explain, I'll take a look at the grape juice here. Now, the first thing is, you'll see it's not Welch's grape juice, because surprisingly, Welch's grape juice is considerably more expensive than the store brand, and this is an experiment, so I figured I'll save a couple dollars and get that store brand. What I want to look at is the ingredients. First, it has exactly what I'm looking for this. It's grape concentrate, water, vitamin C. That's it. No preservatives, no strange minerals. Pretty simple, all natural juice. That's what I wanted. And looking at the nutritional value, it says it has 40 grams of sugar per serving. Now, there's 8 servings in this jug, this half gallon. I'm going to be using the whole thing, so that's 320 grams of sugar. I could probably use that number and incorporate it in my recipe, but I'm trying something a little different with this. I took a gravity reading of the juice itself, and the gravity reading read 1.063. I want a starting gravity for what's in the fermenter to be somewhere around, or as close as I can get, to 1.050. To do that, I need the beer starting gravity to be 1.037. That way, when I mix the two, it should level out at 1.5 or 1.050. So let's see if we can make that happen. When the mash is done, I let the bag drain and I boil off about a half gallon of the sweet wort through the grain bag to help pull out some of the bigger particles and clear it up a little bit. Then I drain the mash into the kettle and get that kettle onto the stove for the boil. Once the boil gets rolling, I set a timer for 60 minutes and just wait, because I only have one boil addition, and that is the hops at 10 minutes along with a little bit of yeast nutrients, also at 10 minutes. Once the boil is done, I chill it down in an ice bath, and I'm looking to hit about a 68-degree pitching temperature for my yeast, but I want to get this wort lower than that because my grape juice has been sitting on the kitchen counter for days, so that's room temperature. So again, I'm trying to find a balance between a colder wort and a warmer juice to get it somewhere around 68. Again, this is a fun experiment. 2 or 3 degrees, I'm not going to worry over in the end if that's where it gets to. Now that the wort is down to temperature, I do add that half gallon of juice to the fermenter and top off the fermenter with the wort. I did take a gravity reading of the wort, and it is around 1.037. It's kind of in that middle spot between 6 and 7. It's pretty close. After I mix everything together, I take a sample of that mix, and I do get that 1.05 target I was looking for. And no one is more surprised, except maybe my math teachers from school, than I am to find out that that actually worked. Now for the fermentation and souring plan, and this is actually gonna be done in one step. I'm trying the Philly sour strain from Lallemand. I hope I'm saying that right. It's a pretty amazing sounding yeast strain. I've never used it before. What it does, it's on the label. It says it's a lactic acid producing yeast strain, and from some seminars and talks they've had online, I've learned that about the first 4 days of fermentation, it produces mostly lactic acid, then kind of turns over into fermenting and producing the alcohol. I suppose both are happening at some degree, but the acid seems to really be coming out in the first 4 days of this. So I'm trying it. I'm curious to see how it works because I want to try it on a kind of bigger batches. The thing I really like about this is that I'm not using any bacteria, so I don't have to get a second set of equipment or segregate my equipment to the soured bacteria. I want to say infected, but I guess that's the right word. The equipment that has a contact with bacteria. I don't want to make it sound like it's that bad, because if I'm doing it on purpose, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And then my regular brewing equipment. Well, the point was, if this works, if it's just producing lactic acid naturally, without any introduction of bacteria, there's no worry for that. So I'm really curious how it's going to come out, and two, really hoping it works, because that opens up a whole new kind of style and ideas and creativity that could possibly come along with just using this one pitch of yeast. Again, in all that research I did, mainly from those seminars, they do say that one packet, the 11 grams, will work for 2.5 gallons. I have a 1 gallon batch, so I am trying to measure out 4.4 grams of yeast. And in this video, you'll see I thought I weighed out 4.8 grams, but it is actually 0.48 grams. So I pitched that, realized a moment later what the scale actually read, and measured out some more yeast to make up for that, to make sure I have the entire amount. And I ended up putting in about 5 grams for this 1 gallon of wort. So now we wait, and it did take quite a few days. I think it took about 3 days, somewhere around there. 3 days until I saw any real activity, until I saw any kind of krausen, and the krausen felt really quick, but the activity continued. So this is a very quick high krausen, and the high krausen isn't very robust. I'm not sure how else to explain that. It had kind of a thin layer. It looked healthy, like it would with any other beer, but it fell really quick. But then that CO2 and the activity inside the fermenter kept going without that krausen, and that might be typical. I don't know. First time using this yeast. That's one thing I don't recall them addressing in these seminars of what to expect during fermentation. So I'm going to keep an eye on that, and I will continue to note that on other experiments I do with this yeast. Once we cross that 10-day mark with this beer, I cold crash it for 3 days, get it in a keg, carbonate it, and now, very anxiously, I get to the tasting. It is tasting time for the Philly Grape Sour Juice experiment, and I have my glass here, and it's frustrating that I can't get a great shot of how gorgeous this color is. I took some extra footage of it against a stark white background under some bright lights, which is in my kitchen against my refrigerator, to kind of get the idea of it. But this camera and the setup I have just is not capturing how gorgeous this color is. It's just really cool how that kind of grape juice and beer mix color came through. So let's get to the tasting. That's the kind of that's the whole reason of this segment, and that's the whole reason of this experiment. So I will say first on the aroma, it smells like a sour. It has that distinct sour, acidic, almost, I equate it to a rotting smell. I probably offended a lot of people by saying that, but that's just how my senses pick up that sour beer smell. I don't want to say it's unpleasant, and I just want to say that it's kind of in there and reminds me of it. It doesn't smell like that particular rotting. It just kind of reminds me of it, but it's that acidic, acrid, maybe that's a better way to say it, aroma is there. Let's try out the taste. It is definitely a sour. That's crazy. That is a lot. It's more sour than I expected. It's not as sour as some of the strongest sours I've had, but I was just kind of, with that really low krausen and that kind of short fermentation time, I wasn't expecting a lot from either side of that flavor spectrum, from the sour or from the beer. Interestingly enough, though, I did take some readings. It dropped down to 1007. So this is 5.7% beer. So it did ferment out just about as completely as you can get. And that is one thing I'm noticing on this flavor right away. And I'm going to take another sip of it to explain. It is dry. It is bone dry. Now, 1007 isn't the driest number. It's pretty low. It's in the dry realm. But I think that yeast, the fermentation part of that yeast, definitely fermented out the sugars in the juice as well as the sugars in the wort. Because it is almost parching dry. Like, I need a drink to follow this. That's how dry it is. I do wish it was a little sweeter, but it's definitively grape. It's sour grape. It's got actually a pretty nice body to it considering how much it's dried out. I wouldn't call it full by any means. It's light to medium with kind of being closer to the medium side, to be real honest with you. Carbonation held great, which I wasn't quite sure, again, with an experimental yeast and putting in half grape juice, what was going to happen. You can still see the head's fallen quite a bit, but it's keeping a very thick, tight ring on there. And I can't really tilt the glass without dumping it, obviously, but there's a distinct layer of bubbles on top. In fact, there is no real clear spot. So the carbonation is holding really, really well. And it probably has a lot to do with the wheat malt in that half of the grist. So take another taste to kind of explore a little bit here. I think the one thing it's screaming for is a little sweetness, and that's because it's dry and sour. I wouldn't want it to be cloyingly sweet, obviously, but a little bit of some kind of sugars in there. Something, I don't know what, definitely not lactose. Honey is probably a little too strong. Maybe just some kind of simple natural sugar. If you can confirm that the yeast are dead or use some, was it potassium sorbate and potassium, I can't remember. I know I have this written down for mead making, but the chemicals, or I guess chemicals, for lack of a better term, that you put in to make sure the yeast are no longer multiplying and being able to ferment too much longer, put that in here and then throw in some kind of simple sugars. You can put in some, artificial sweeteners as well, but I would kind of like to have a natural taste of this to go along with everything else that's natural in here. It's good. I really like this. I am going to finish this and kind of happy that I have a few more bottles to get not only opinions from other people, but continue to taste it myself. It's also ridiculously clear. I forgot to mention that in all this, especially with a half wheat grist, but I guess it's quarter wheat once it got split with the juice. I'm happy with the fruit flavor, distinctively grape, but like I've been saying, and I'm hammering home, really, really, really dry. So a little sweetness would cut through that. I'm almost wondering, I will say, I don't think I matched that style from that brewery I was trying to mimic. And I'm almost wondering if they add grape juice after the fermentation. That might be something I try. Before I get to the end here, I want to remark again how insanely cool this Philly sour yeast is, because this is a sour beer. The more I'm drinking it, it's distinctively sour. There's no denying that. And it's crazy that I was able to do that without kettle souring, without adding any kind of bacteria. And the equipment I did this all on, I can all do it again. I can brew a lager tomorrow, a alt beer Thursday, and I can make another sour again with only my regular cleaning regimen. That's crazy. I cannot wait to try to use this yeast again on several ideas, and particularly the fruit additions, the flavor additions. I think I'm going to stick with that grist combination, the recipe for the beer part, and see what I can do with different types of fruit, like purees and maybe even some natural fruit additions, and when I can put them in. During fermentation, after fermentation, at bottling, I think I'm going to have a lot of fun with this. I think the next thing I'm going to do with that Philly sour yeast is make a full batch and kind of split that up between different vessels for those different experiments I was talking about. But this is a crazy fun yeast, and it's funny that it works so well. I kind of forgot until the end of the tasting that was half of the experiment. I'm trying to figure out what flavors I would change in the beer, the sour characteristics of dry, and didn't realize, wait a minute, this one strain of yeast, this really unique strain of yeast did all this, and I'm kind of neglecting that. That, to me, tells me it did its job well. There's not something standing out that says I need to add this in order to get that style I want. The sour part of it is nailed down. I have no complaints about that part of it, and I can't wait to do it again. It's the grape part, the flavoring, that is what I want to dial in, but I still enjoy this. It's still quite good. It's the biggest thing is that it's dry, and with that sourness on it, it just gets your palate screaming for something to follow it. I'm going to try it again one more time before I wrap up here. It is good, but like I said, could be better. That's a good way to say it. So I'm not unhappy with this. I'm thrilled with the yeast results, and I can't wait to try this again. In fact, sooner than later at this point. So that's it. I'm going to go enjoy this and think about what I'm going to do next for my flavor additives for my next Philly Sour. So until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in that next episode.